The first thing that made my stomach drop wasn't a text, a photo, or some dramatic confession. It was a tiny blue dot on a map that had absolutely no business being there. I stared at my phone for almost a full minute, convinced the location app had glitched. It had happened before. Phones lose signal. GPS drifts. Technology lies. People you love aren't supposed to. My girlfriend had kissed me goodbye that afternoon, grabbed an overnight bag, and smiled like it was the most ordinary Friday in the world. "I'm staying with Emma tonight," she had said while slipping on her jacket. "She's having a rough week. Girls' night, wine, bad movies." I laughed and told her to have fun. Emma lived 20 minutes away. I even reminded her to lock the doors because Emma always forgot. Everything about us felt stable back then. We'd been together for almost 4 years, rented a small apartment, argued about dishes instead of serious things, talked about buying a house someday, and occasionally browsed engagement rings online just to joke about my terrible taste. Nothing seemed broken. At least, nothing I could see. I wish I could say that Friday was the first time something felt off, but that would be rewriting history to make myself look less naive. Looking back, the warning signs had been piling up for months. She had started keeping her phone face down on the table. Little things like that. She used to leave it anywhere, even ask me to answer messages while she cooked. Suddenly it was always in her hand or tucked into her pocket. Her work schedule became unpredictable too. Meetings ran late. Coworkers wanted drinks after work. She needed alone time more often than before. None of those things are proof of anything. People change. Jobs get stressful. That's exactly what I kept telling myself. Whenever I noticed something strange, I'd invent a reasonable explanation before she even had the chance. Because trusting her was easier than imagining the alternative. That night, around 11, I casually opened our location sharing app to see if she'd made it to Emma's safely. Instead of Emma's neighborhood, her phone appeared nearly 3 hours away. A city we'd never had any reason to visit. At first, I actually laughed. I remember saying out loud, "Well, that's definitely broken." I refreshed the app once. Then twice. Then 5 more times. The blue dot never moved. It stayed planted in the middle of that unfamiliar city like it belonged there. I called her. Straight to voicemail. That wasn't unusual by itself. Her phone battery wasn't great, and she sometimes muted calls during movie nights. I sent a simple message instead. "Everything okay? Your location looks weird." No reply. I considered texting Emma, but something stopped me. Maybe pride. Maybe fear that I'd sound paranoid. So I waited. Midnight came. 1 in the morning. Still nothing. The longer the silence lasted, the louder my own thoughts became. I paced around our apartment, turning every innocent explanation into something darker. Maybe her phone had been stolen. Maybe she lost it. Maybe she borrowed someone's car. Or maybe she hadn't gone to Emma's at all. That last thought hit me so hard I physically sat down on the kitchen floor. For the first time in our relationship, I realized I was afraid of what the truth might actually be. I barely slept that night. Every hour I checked the app again, hoping the location would suddenly jump back to Emma's neighborhood so I could laugh at myself for overthinking everything. It never did. The phone stayed in the same area until almost 6 in the morning. Then it started moving toward our city. About an hour later, I heard her key in the front door. She walked in carrying coffee and a paper bag of pastries, smiling like nothing had happened. "Morning," she said. Emma barely slept, so neither did I. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "How's Emma?" She shrugged. Still upset about her breakup. The lie came so naturally that it scared me more than the location ever had. I asked another question. "What movie did you two watch?" She hesitated for less than a second. "Oh, some stupid romantic comedy. I don't even remember the name." She kissed my cheek, set the coffee on the counter, and started talking about traffic. Meanwhile, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I already knew she hadn't been where she claimed. I just didn't know why. I decided not to confront her right away. People always say that if someone is lying, they'll eventually trip over their own story. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe there was still some explanation that didn't destroy everything we had built together. Later that afternoon, I casually mentioned Emma again. Maybe we should invite her over next weekend, I said while we were cleaning the kitchen. My girlfriend smiled without looking at me. Yeah, she'd like that. So you stayed at her apartment all night? She nodded immediately. Of course. I forced myself to stay calm. That's strange. She finally looked up. Why? I turned my phone around and showed her the location history. Her face changed so quickly it was almost impossible to miss. The color drained from her cheeks, and for a split second, pure panic replaced her usual confidence. Then, just as quickly, she recovered. That app is wrong, she said, crossing her arms. GPS glitches all the time. Maybe it did. But her eyes weren't denying it. They were searching for a way out. I wanted to believe her so badly that I almost accepted the explanation. Almost. Instead, I opened the location history from the previous few months. I had never paid much attention to it before because I trusted her. Now I started scrolling through old weekends, looking for anything unusual. My hands were shaking. There it was. The same city. Not once. Not twice. 5 different Friday nights over the last 3 months. Each visit followed the same pattern. She left work, disappeared for hours, stayed overnight, and returned early the next morning before I woke up. I looked up from my phone. Can you explain this? She stared at the screen without saying a word. I've never even checked this before, I continued. If I hadn't looked last night, I still wouldn't know. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Finally, she whispered, "It's not what you think." I laughed, but it sounded empty. Then tell me what I should think. Silence filled the apartment. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes after an argument. It was the silence of someone desperately trying to invent a version of the truth that might still be believable. She sat down on the couch and buried her face in her hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked exhausted, like someone carrying a secret that had finally become too heavy to hold. Then she looked up. "I've been seeing someone," she whispered. The words landed with a strange kind of silence. I expected shouting, denial, anything dramatic. Instead, everything inside me went completely numb. "What do you mean, seeing someone?" She wiped her eyes. "It started months ago. I never planned for it to happen. I couldn't stop staring at her." "So every time you said you were with Emma?" She nodded without meeting my eyes. "I was with him." The room suddenly felt too small. I remembered every goodbye kiss, every late-night text saying she loved me, every promise about our future. All of it had happened while another man was waiting for her in that other city. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated. "You don't know him." I laughed bitterly. "I didn't know you either." That sentence hurt even more after I said it, because deep down, I realized it was true. The questions started pouring out before I could stop them. "How long? Does he know about me? Did everyone else know except me?" She answered between tears, each confession making the last one feel even worse. "It started after a work conference. Yes, he knew I was in a relationship." "No. Emma didn't know at first." I caught that last part immediately. "At first?" She closed her eyes. "I told her later." "So Emma covered for you?" She nodded. That hurt almost as much as the affair itself. Emma had sat across from me at dinners, laughed at my jokes, asked about our vacation plans, all while helping hide what was happening behind my back. I stood up because I couldn't stay still anymore. Did you ever plan to tell me? I was going to end it. Which relationship? I asked. She looked completely lost. I don't know. That answer shattered the final piece of hope I had been clinging to. She hadn't chosen me. She simply hadn't decided which life she wanted to keep. And while she was making up her mind, I was unknowingly living inside a lie. I left the apartment before I said something I couldn't take back. I drove around for hours without any destination, stopping twice because I realized I had been staring at red lights long after they turned green. My phone kept vibrating. Her name. Again. And again. I ignored every call. Eventually, she sent a message. Please come home. We need to talk. Another followed a few minutes later. I'm so sorry. Then another. I love you. That last one made me pull over. I stared at the screen, wondering how someone could write those 3 words after admitting they had spent months sleeping with someone else. I wanted to reply with something cruel. Instead, I turned the phone off. That evening I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town because I couldn't bear the thought of walking back into our apartment. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and old carpet, but at least it was quiet. For the first time in years, I cried without worrying whether someone in the next room would hear me. I wasn't just grieving the relationship. I was grieving the future I had already imagined. I went back 2 days later because avoiding reality wasn't solving anything. She was sitting at the kitchen table exactly where I'd left her, surrounded by untouched coffee cups and crumpled tissues. The apartment felt strangely frozen, like time had refused to move while I was gone. I'm ending it, she said before I even took my jacket off. I already did. I looked at her without saying a word. I called him the day you found out. It's over. She sounded desperate, as if those words alone should have repaired everything. I asked the only question that mattered. Would you have ended it if I hadn't checked your location? Her eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That silence answered better than any excuse could. She finally whispered, I don't know. I nodded slowly. That's the problem. She reached for my hand across the table. I pulled mine away. 4 months, she'd been making choices behind my back. Now she wanted me to make the hardest decision of my life in a single afternoon. I realized trust doesn't disappear all at once. It dies one lie at a time. The weeks that followed were somehow worse than the day I found out. People imagine betrayal as one explosive moment, but it isn't. It's 1,000 small discoveries that keep reopening the same wound. I couldn't walk through our apartment without seeing reminders. The couch where we'd watched movies. The coffee mugs we bought on vacation. The framed picture from my sister's wedding where she was smiling at me while, according to the timeline she'd confessed to, she was already seeing him. Every memory became suspicious. I started questioning everything. Had she texted him while we were having dinner? Was she thinking about him when she told me she loved me? Had our happiest moments been real for her, or were they just performances? She kept apologizing. She offered therapy. She offered complete access to her phone, her passwords, even her location forever. Months earlier, those gestures would have felt unnecessary because I trusted her completely. Now they felt meaningless. Trust isn't something you can rebuild with passwords. Once your mind starts doubting every smile and every promise, it becomes impossible to tell what's genuine and what's simply another attempt to keep you from leaving. Our families eventually found out, even though we had promised each other we would keep everything private. My mother noticed something was wrong the first time I visited alone. She kept asking where my girlfriend was, and I kept giving vague answers until I couldn't anymore. When I finally told her the truth, she just reached across the table and held my hand. She didn't criticize my girlfriend. She didn't tell me what to do. She simply said, I'm sorry you're carrying this. For some reason, those words broke me more than anything else. Her parents reacted differently. They called me together, insisting relationships were complicated and that everyone deserved a second chance. They admitted their daughter had made terrible choices, but they begged me not to throw away 4 years over one mistake. One mistake. I wanted to ask them how many lies it took before something stopped being a mistake and became a pattern. Instead, I thanked them for calling and ended the conversation politely. No one else had lived inside the relationship. No one else had spent months trusting someone who had quietly built an entirely different life behind their back. About a month later, she asked if we could meet one last time before I made a final decision. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our apartments. She looked thinner than I remembered, and the dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't been sleeping much either. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said, "I miss us." I looked into my coffee instead of at her. "I miss who I thought we were." She started crying almost immediately. "I know I destroyed everything. I'd do anything to fix it." I believed she meant it. That was the hardest part. Her regret felt genuine, but it had arrived only after the truth had cornered her. I asked one final question. "When you were driving to see him, did you ever think about me waiting at home?" She covered her face with both hands. Every single time. The answer should have satisfied me. Instead, it made me feel even emptier. She had thought about me. She had simply chosen to keep going anyway. Some decisions are impossible to forgive because they weren't accidents. They were repeated choices. A week after that meeting, I packed the rest of my belongings and moved out for good. There wasn't a dramatic goodbye. No screaming. No broken dishes. Just cardboard boxes, awkward silence, and two people carefully avoiding each other's eyes. As I carried the last box to my car, she stood in the doorway. "I hope one day you can forgive me," she said. I stopped for a moment but didn't turn around. "I probably will." She sounded relieved until I finished. "But forgiveness isn't the same as wanting you back." When I drove away, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel free. I just felt exhausted. The months that followed were lonely in ways I hadn't expected. I deleted our photos, but I couldn't erase the memories attached to them. I stopped checking her social media because every update reopened the wound. Sleep became difficult. Trust became even harder. Whenever someone new showed interest in me, I caught myself wondering what they were hiding. That scared me more than the breakup itself. She hadn't only damaged our relationship. She had changed the way I looked at every relationship that came after it. It's been a few years now, and my life looks completely different from the one I imagined back then. I eventually met someone else, but I took things painfully slowly. I never wanted another relationship built on assumptions instead of honesty. My new partner knows why I sometimes ask difficult questions or go quiet after hearing a story that doesn't quite add up. She has never mocked those fears. She understands they weren't created overnight. Every now and then, I still think about that tiny blue dot on my phone. It's strange how something so small changed the entire direction of my life. People often ask whether I regret checking her location that night. The truth is, I regret needing to. I miss the version of myself who believed love automatically meant loyalty. I miss trusting without feeling like I had to verify every detail. If you're reading this because your instincts keep telling you something is wrong, don't ignore them just because the truth might hurt. Sometimes the hardest discovery isn't learning that someone lied to you. It's realizing how long you were willing to lie to yourself because losing them felt more terrifying than facing reality.